Welcome to the Welcome to this week's Cablecast News program. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. To help me with this week's news is Mr. Kevin Berglund, my co-anchor. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, on our program, we focus on the city of Maplewood or issues that concern those people living in the city of Maplewood. And tonight we're going to cover two particular issues that we've been talking about in the past couple of shows, but that these are additional information and supplements to that previous reports. The first being the Rush Line purple bus rapid transit that is going through the city of Maplewood up the Bruce Vento Trail. And as we've reported on these programs in the past, the Bruce Vento Trail is an ecological corridor in the city of Maplewood. Long, long ago, it was, of course, a railroad track going through the city of Maplewood, but once that was no longer a railroad track being used for freight and such, this county of Ramsey, they purchased it back in the 1990s, and then it was converted to a bike and pedestrian trail, and of course has a lovely canopy of older mature trees, and is also used as a wildlife corridor for wildlife to travel between different chains of lake in Maplewood, between the Gladstone area and then the Casey chain of lakes and the Keller chain of lakes. So, Mr. Berglund, you went to a recent open house regarding the Bruce Vento Trail and the Rush Line corridor, correct?
Just a few days ago, right there on the Bruce Vento Greenway Trail, the one that runs right through Maplewood, only a couple blocks away from the intersection of the Gateway Trail, one of the greenest real environmental areas there is in Maplewood, because it is a area that people can not only walk on, there's a tree canopy, but because also it's a great corridor for wildlife and nature. So they had a pop-up tent event, meaning they put a little pop-up tent you might get at Menards, and then they put some photos up there on some tables, and I guess they call that a way they get community input. Now, of course, there's not much going on there, and they have many, many staff members there. Who knows where they're all from? Because if I recall, they're not really identifying themselves too much. They have no listing of where they're from and who they represent. So that's, if you want to figure that all out, you have to actually question them, because there's no way that you can listen to others talking to them. In other words, there is no meeting. The advantage, of course, of having a meeting.
So what you're saying is there's no presentation.
Yeah.
That they're just standing around, milling around, waiting for people to pop in to their pop-up.
And you're absolutely right. So there's no way to build and understand what other people's concerns are, or all these questions that you would like to give. You have to redo them over and over and over, so nobody really gets past first base. Because you can't go very deep, you can't understand anything, and they have it all so much confined that they really don't want to talk about anything other than their pre-agenda or their pre-idea, which they're going to try to push out.
Right. Now, we have some film footage from about approximately a week ago when a presentation was given to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners, when they all were wearing their hat as the Ramsey County Rail Authority. And at this presentation, there is a point where the individual who is responsible at the county for spearheading this project is telling the commissioners about one of the important aspects of reaching out to the community is determining where the station stops should be for the bus rapid transit along the route. So let's take a look at that clip.
Phase is station area planning. One of the things that we've learned from other projects that have gone down this path, done the detailed engineering, only to realize that if they would have talked to a few people, the station's in the wrong spot. The development is planned on the other side of the street. So we did a lot of front-ended station area planning and was very community focused with a series of working groups. And this occurred mainly last spring, summer, fall timeframe to make sure we got our stations in the right location up front. And then we're going to.
Now, Mr. Berglund, you heard how he was saying that it was community focused. You saw on the slide it said public engagement, that they learned a lesson from in the past where it's important to find out where the right spots are for these stations so they don't put them in the wrong stations, in the wrong spots. So it sounds like he's got all the right elements in his presentation that makes sense, that they went out to the community, they found out where people wanted stops, where it would be logical, what would make sense, what would be convenient for the users.
One-liner after another, buzzword after buzzword, and yet when I showed up right there on the Bruce Vento bicycle environmental trail with my bicycle, Bruce Vento Trail and Jarvis, the big pitch there from the supposed mayor of Maplewood, Mary Abrams, was that they were, of course this is right on a park called Harvest Park, they're actually going to move their parking lot, which is in a logical, appropriate spot for the park. They're going to move the parking lot over there to Jarvis and the trail, a big parking lot, as one of their major stops. Now, of course, she says they're not going to take one more inch of park, but they're just going to be moving this place where everybody has been parking. And I guess, listening to her, she's not saying any of this on video. She's not saying any of this on community television. She's not saying any of this in the Maplewood newsletter, that they're going to put this big parking lot, which is going to be a big park and ride location, into a park. And they're going to say that is the park. They're not taking any of the park, but the parking lot for the park, which is over there right now, which is used for people who want to go to the playground, walk on the trails. You know very well in Maplewood, if you've ever been to Maplewood Park, is none of them really have a large parking lot. They're going to, according to Mary Abrams, they're going to move that one parking lot in the perfectly excellent location for the neighborhood onto the other side of the neighborhood, where the members of the neighborhood can't access it with a car except going around a long ways around.
So that I understand correctly, what you're saying is that they're going to take the parking lot for the park that is accessible to the community and the people who use the park, that they're going to take their parking space away from them, and then they're going to create another whole bigger parking space in the park on the other end that is only accessible off of Highway 36, and it's going to be appropriated then for the general greater public at large. And then, of course, what the end result of that will be is that then there will be less people using the park, because there's no place to park to use the park where you've got the facilities of the park. And so then Maplewood in a few years will say, well, because of the demand for the park has gone down, gee, wouldn't it really make a lot of sense if we lopped off part of that park and let's put in some high density voucher housing to justify the investment of the big parking lot that we put in where we think there should be a BRT station? Did I get it right?
Well, the one thing is she did say that the parking lot is going to be no bigger than the small parking lot is already there. But of course, this is not in print. This is not on video.
Okay, so then let me understand that chain of thought. Because if you only have the parking lot be exactly the same size as the parking lot currently used for the park, and yet we want it to be the parking lot for the BRT that's going to have all these thousands of people use it, will that parking lot ever sustain the thousands of people that are going to be using that BRT that we're being led to believe are going to use the service? Or is it going to be undersized, and then because it's undersized, that won't be an effective use of a BRT station because it's undersized and nobody has a place to put their cars?
Well, and that seems like would be the rationale. The only thing is that I think that they already know that this BRT is not going to be used, and I guess they're only expecting maybe 5 cars a day, even though they say that this whole BRT is needed for all this transportation they're going to be involved in. So it's one way or the other.
Right, and there is, of course, that question, who decided that the BRT station, that one of them would be at that location?
Well,
yeah, who decided that? Now, he, in his presentation, implies that through extensive public engagement, they arrived at where those stations in Maplewood would be. However, on these programs, we had a newscast, well, back in June 2018, where we reported on the report at the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission, where the individual who was serving on the station location subcommittee was giving his report on the amount of public input that they, as members of the community on that subcommittee, had into establishing where these BRT stations in Maplewood should be. Let's take a look.
What was the discussion around the number of stops? So that you reviewed. So why not more? Why not fewer?
To be honest with you, we never had a discussion of the number of stops. By the time we got involved in it, there were 3 stops that we were asked to consider. And basically the advantages of why those stops were there, or disadvantages, and where, in the last meeting, where to place the terminals. But we've always been given the mandate to consider the placement of 3 stops in that area. So.
So the people from the community that were selected to be on this subcommittee to determine where those stations should be, they had no input. It was mandated where the stations were going to be, and they were just sold the concept. They were just sold the concept. That's how they were arrived at, not because there was any public discussion or thoughtful engagement.
And of course, this one employee of Ramsey County who's going up there and giving his one-liners, it's like he's getting away with murder. He's giving all this information, and there's no raw data to back it up. There's no meeting minutes to back it up. There's no video to back it up. But he's making these outlandish claims.
Yes, and here in the next clip, we're going to see what kind of documentation that they have of public engagement. They got a snapshot of it.
Public input is around environmental and health impacts, Bruce Vento Trail, which I'll talk more about later, pedestrian safety and maintenance are things that we hear a lot about, and we're really careful to document all of those comments that we receive.
They are very careful to document all the comments that they're getting from people at these public engagement efforts. And of course, there was a lady in that little photograph holding up some kind of a little placard saying she has a comment. Now, Mr. Berglund, you were at the pop-up this week. Did you see anybody writing down your comments?
I had some comments, and I gave my comments, and I freely gave my comments. There was nobody taking notes. There was no one with a clipboard. There was no one with a little back of a napkin or a back of an envelope. Nobody was taking any comments
And they
at
were
all.
recording them.
They were not recording them, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. So how are they recording all of that public engagement? We've reported a couple weeks ago where they say that they have folders and folders and folders of public comment. But do they really? Or have they reached their limit on public comment and now they've gotten to the point where you go to the pop-ups and they don't bother writing anything down anymore because they figure it's all duplicative of anything that they've got in their binders and binders of comments already?
And when I was there, I didn't see anybody with magic markers or anybody with little plastic signs that you could write your comments on, and they would take a picture of that to document it.
Now, let me ask you this. If you were given that opportunity and you had a magic marker and a clipboard with a piece of paper on it, and you had the chance to write a little quick comment that you could show in front of the camera for them to document your comment that day, what would it have been?
Well, and of course, I would have said, first of all, where is any of your raw data, which goes into Decimate, this environmental gem in Maplewood? Because unfortunately, and this gentleman here who's making all these big claims of all their engagement and all their opinions taken by the public, I think what I believe, listening to others, is that at least 90% to 95% of the people are stating to these county officials that they're 100% against this false boondoggle.
Right.
And of
So-
course, this guy with his big words of merit is implying exactly the opposite.
So if you were to say on your little clipboard, you would say something to the fact of, prove up the rationale for decimating the Bruce Vento Ecological Trail. Now that would be a comment that you could put on a little poster board in front of the camera.
And of course, if we're going to get back to his documentation or his speech there, I think almost every sentence, every phrase that he has a one-liner for, I think you could find you would find that he has no data on. You can just go through the whole 20-minute presentation, and it's just false information. It's deception.
Right, exactly. It's a sales pitch. It's all about marketing. Well, now let's go on to our next clip, and this is from that Ramsey County Rail Authority presentation talking about how they're going to address having the BRT cross safely over a path used by children to get to school every day.
The visual aids that we're using in the community to gather input. So this is a view of what the rush line could potentially look like operating within the Ramsey County right-of-way in Maplewood. This is just to the west, or to the east, or the west of Weaver Elementary School, which is a public elementary school in Maplewood. It's just south of County Road B. And so we used this and a series of similar visualizations to do some targeted engagement with the Weaver school community. So we gave a presentation to the parent-teacher organization there. We brought visualizations like this to the Weaver Elementary School Carnival and showed parents and students what this could all look like. We really emphasized that we're proposing a grade separation in this particular area because that kind of local trail connection that runs perpendicular to the Bruce Vento Trail is used by children walking to school, and so grade separation is an appropriate treatment here to avoid any conflicts between kids walking to school and the BRT. Here's another view of that same area that places a little more emphasis on that underpass for that local trail connection where kids are using that to walk to and from school.
So of course, this makes it look so simple, and yet anybody who's actually had to do any kind of grading like this or developing a road or anything to that sort, you know that first of all, you're going to have the proper supports. That isn't going to be quite as easy as they make it sound. You also have to think about what is the slope and the angle. Mr. Berglund, talk a little bit about that.
And of course, you've seen their artistic drawing or their picture, and if you'll notice that there's no run up. It seems like it's just going level, and all of a sudden it's going over, like it's a little bridge, a walk bridge over a creek. Now this is carrying some heavy buses. This is a regular concrete highway. This isn't a little wood trail over a little wood bridge over the creek. And of course, one thing that they completely ignore there, again, is any kind of data, any kind of real information. How high is this bridge to be? What will be the slope? How long will the run-up be?
Well, maybe they're only basing it based upon the fact that only kindergarten kids are going to walk through here, or elementary school kids, and they haven't reached the height of 6 feet yet. So maybe that little thing that they walk through, that little tunnel, maybe it's only going to be 4 feet tall.
And of course, in addition to this, there's issues of safety, because if you're going to have a 2-lane concrete road, which has a bus trail or has a bike space on one side of it and has a walking path, that's going to be a long underpass, and to have kindergartners going under this dark little long underpass seems to be a huge safety issue, especially, sometimes it is dark at different times of the year.
And you do raise that question, whether or not will the co-used bike path and pedestrian trail, are they going to be on that same overpass with the bus rapid transit lanes? Now, that visualization didn't show that. It showed that maybe they were going to be off to the side someplace, but is that accurate either? Who really knows? And so you see, there's a lot of questions about this. And when you were at that pop-up, you asked them if there was going to be a bridge at County Road B, correct?
I asked them very specifically if there's a bridge at County Road B, because County Road B is just a little jot further than this overpass, this big bridge they're going to build to let the kids get to school.
Right. So you were trying to visualize how it is that they're going to have this overpass over the trail used by the children to get to Weaver School, and then at the same time that the bus then would then be at level grade once more in order to cross over County Road B, because you were thinking there wasn't really enough distance between that trail and County Road B in order for the slope of that overpass to actually get down to ground level again to get to County Road B, correct?
And that's of course why it's so key exactly what the rise on this bridge is going to be, because if they're just going to keep the trail pretty much the same height and just drill way down into the ground and put the underpass in the ground as if it's a little tunnel that people go underground for, then maybe they can do it. But if it's going to be 12 feet high, which is going to start to be monumental, there has to be a lot of slope. And of course, I did ask him if there would be a bridge, and the county employee definitely 100% said there would be no bridge over County Road B. I asked her then if there was to be any other bridges in the city of Maplewood, and she told me there was to be a bridge in Maplewood over Highway 694. So then I asked her again, where is the edge of Maplewood? And she says it's up there on Berkeley Road. So the public of Maplewood is going there to get information.
And of course, just for your information, Berkeley Road is in White Bear Lake. So you see, it's not in Maplewood. They've got their borders misconstrued.
And the Berkeley
Now-
Road, of course, is a road that Sam's Club is on.
Yes, and so what it would be fascinating is this whole concept of knowledge, of having people knowledgeable there at the meeting. Now let's take a look at our next clip.
Overall, the reaction among parents was pretty positive to these. They appreciated the grade separation and generally liked what they saw. So we also get a lot of questions about what are intersections going to look like when the BRT guideway intersects with a regular street. So we usually bring some visualizations to our engagement efforts that kind of take a typical intersection like this one and try to demystify it for people.
Now that visualization shows that the grade at County Road B is ground level. That by the time that the BRT gets to County Road B from its little overpass that you saw in the previous slide, it's at ground level. And they say that there will be signalization at that intersection. Currently, there is a four-way stop sign at that intersection. But what they're going to change it to, from what I understand him saying, is that there will be signalization whereby when it's time for the bus to go across County Road B, a light will go on that will stop all the cars so that the bus can just ramrod right through and not have to stop. So that's one of the places where they're going to shave a few seconds off of their time when they're calculating how much time it takes for their BRT to go from Union Depot to the end of the route. That's 14 miles, 21 stops, and so in order to shave off a couple of seconds, they're going to spend millions to put in a signal that will stop all the cars at the intersection just so that the bus can ramrod through and not have to stop. So now we know, well, that doesn't solve their problem of the time, does it?
Well, it doesn't. It makes it longer already, and this is longer than the regular slow plodding bus that goes from St. Paul. So rapid in rapid bus transit does not mean smaller amount of time, a quicker ride. Rapid means something different. Rapid means rapid boarding, meaning that you prepay your ticket before you get on. Rapid has nothing to do with the speed of this bus in getting to the destination. One other point on that slide is or two other points. You can see that the trees have all been decimated. The trees in that area. It looks like it's in the middle of an urban area.
Well, and even the one showing the overpass for the Weaver School path, there's no trees.
Right.
That, of course, is entirely tree covered right now.
And the other point there is, you'll notice, if you see, they did get back on their feet to having a bike trail there, but you'll notice which side the bike trail is on. The bike trail is on not the side of where Weaver School would be on, which would be the flatter land, but the bike trail is on the area which would be coming off more the area where there's a little gully. So it seemed logical from the previous slide that if they weren't going to run that bike trail on the bridge, they would be running it alongside the bridge, but it would be on the Weaver side, which would be the right side to do it based upon elevation.
But in this picture, they show it on the other side.
Right.
So you're saying, now I did not pick up on that. So what you're saying is that between these two visualizations, they have misvisualized where the trail is going to be. In one slide, they show it east, and on the other one, they show it west.
And so the question is that these pictures are so general there, it doesn't even look like anybody who drew the pictures actually went out to the site or looked at the site or looked at a satellite. These photos, for all you know, are just photos they grabbed off the internet of a bridge at an intersection. I think they're all fake and phony, that there is no thought, there is no realistic information there.
Well, we will keep you posted once they determine what side of the bus rapid transit lanes they are going to put that trail on. Which visualization is accurate? So next we're going to move on over to our next topic today, where we want to conclude our report on the Maplewood Capital Improvement Plan. And this is the plan that Maplewood has been putting together that's supposed to look forward to the next 5 years. And we ended at the point where the finance director was giving a presentation to the council about the past state of affairs when it came to Maplewood's funding of road improvement projects, the amount of debt that Maplewood has as a result of those projects, and some of the financial pickles that Maplewood found itself in as a result of some of their questionable bonding techniques and strategies. Well, let's continue with our film footage of the workshop presentation.
Street reconstruction projects, so you'll have bonding for part of the project costs, but also bonding for assessments. And in our street reclamation projects, you have franchise fee instead of geo bonding for project costs, but you still have debt for assessments on that.
So let's bring up that piece of the pie. And this shows you that when they do their road improvement projects, that they're getting money from many different sources. Now, in the past, what Maplewood has been doing is that some of these sources of revenue, they actually bond against the future revenue, so that even though they are collecting the revenues, those immediate revenues that they've collected don't go to the projects of today. They actually go to pay the bonding and the debt associated with projects of the past.
So what you're getting at is, if they're redoing your street in front of your house and they say your contribution to this street, because you live on this street, is $8,000 or $6,000, and they call that an assessment, that money that you actually are paying to go to your street is not, in fact, in the Maplewood case, actually going to your street. It's going to debt they've had from other streets.
Right.
So it's
exactly.
actually a false impression that they're leaving for people, that the street, your money is going for the street in front of your house
And you
in
see,
a direct way.
and there's something that, as I'm listening to them describing what they were doing in the past, some of this I knew, much of this we've reported in the past before, but we discovered more of it through this workshop, in that it makes me think back to those guys who were convicted of Ponzi schemes. Because you know how the typical Ponzi scheme works, is that you have this concept that you're selling, and then you find somebody who is going to pitch in some money to buy into the big dream. Well, they buy into it, you got this pile of cash. Then what you do is that you spend it on something else other than the big dream that somebody thought that they were paying for. Now, of course, something is coming due, or that person is looking for their money back, or they're looking for their investment back, or the interest on their investment. But in order to keep the whole Ponzi scheme running smoothly, you have to go find somebody else or another stream of revenue to collect that money so you can pay that off. And so this person thinks they're okay, and this person has bought into the dream, and then of course they want their stuff later, so then you have to go find somebody else to go get more money from. Meanwhile, like the city of Maplewood, you're living high off the hog, everybody's making great money, they make more than the average median for similar positions in other municipalities in the metro, everybody's doing good, it looks like things are fine, and in the end, it comes down to the day when somebody or some entity tells the city of Maplewood, you can't be doing bonding like this. You can't be doing some of these things you've been doing. So now, over the last 5 years, their new finance director has been busy trying to figure out how to get them out of this mess that they're in. And that's part of the reason why we have the presentation at this workshop.
And everybody's always told everything is great. Of course, one thing you can be sure, because there's always money needed to pay those the interest on the bonds they've taken out. You're always going to have another road project the next year, another road project, because they got to bring in more money
Right.
to pay off the past. So there always is going to be a road project. There's no way to get out of that.
And you
loop.
see, and that is part of the intentional neglect of the streets, because in Maplewood, for years and years and years, it was their policy never to do seal coating. Even when they had brand new streets in, and under the typical scenario, once one of those brand new streets has gotten to the age of about 9 years old, this is what I understand from my research, once they're about 9 years old, then maybe 8, it's appropriate to do a seal coat to help protect its life, so that way it will last even longer. But you see, in Maplewood, they never did that. And there was this intentional neglect so that the roads would always go to pot, and that they would go to pot sooner than their anticipated lifetime, because you need those road projects to keep the facade of the funding and the bonding and the debt continuing to go and go and go.
In other words, this sounds like a big vision. They up there behind closed doors, the top administrators are saying, we're just going to let these streets go to hell, so people will, despite whatever we're charging them for their little plot out in front of their house on the road, the special assessment, they're never going to oppose it.
Yes, and when I was mayor, I always kept asking this question: why aren't we doing seal coating? And I was given the phony baloney answer that, oh, there are some circles that believe it doesn't work. And so that's of the mind we are, so we're not doing it. And so then I asked, if we were to add seal coating to our budget to seal coat the roads that should be seal coated, if we believe that that worked, how much would it be each year? Well, keep in mind, Maplewood's annual budget is about $40 million. I was told it would only be $150,000 to add seal coating to the budget. That's what it would cost.
And of course, that's why communities do sealing coating, not only because it's what you need to do to keep your asphalt roads in great shape, because it is just a dime for a huge maintenance. So communities that don't have these big, big property, commercial property tax locations like Maplewood does, 3M, Maplewood Mall, St. John's Hospital, communities in rural areas, they want to keep their streets in good shape because they can't play these big Ponzi scheme. Plus, the neighbors are more organized in many rural communities and counties all across Minnesota. What's odd, if you take a look at some of these streets in Maplewood that were paved 1950, 1955, they've had the seal coat program, and okay, it's 60 years later, 70 years later, and now there might be problems in the street, but if they would have 15 years ago been on that maintenance program, these streets that they laid in Maplewood, which they claimed didn't have a good foundation, didn't have concrete curbing to hold them in, how come they held together that long until the administrators up at Maplewood decided we're just going to completely neglect them?
And what's ironic is now that many of the crafters of this scheme
Story.
up in Maplewood.
Telling their story.
Yeah. Now that many of those crafters of this scheme to keep the money flowing in by use of bonding and the road re-improvement projects being the front for it. Now the people of Public Works are saying, you know, it's time we actually got to get back to doing seal coating. And that the finance director is saying, you know, I'm thinking that we shouldn't be bonding for staff salaries and paying interest on that. I think maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. And so we're seeing some changes. But these are all difficult things, especially when you're used to having a different kind of diet for over 20 years.
When they started on this program of this big Ponzi scheme or this big story in Maplewood, and they neglected the roads, and they ended up ruining the roads, which some think beyond repair, because if you don't maintain your roads, you know, in Minnesota, like they say, the water is going to get in the cracks, and the frozen cycle is going to ruin the roads. Now they've got a city that has major problems. So what are they going to do? You know what they're going to do. They're just going to continue to tax and tax and tax more.
When I first came here, I think we met with you all individually, and we talked about why the debt was as high as it was and what we could maybe do about it. And it seemed pretty daunting at the time. Michael Thompson was here as the Public Works Director at the time. He was very helpful in telling me about the history of the projects and just going through them and understanding what happened. But he didn't stay too long. And then Steve took over, and it took a little while for him to really get on board with all the things that he had. It took a while to get his position replaced. But we got together as soon as we could and started working.
So let's put that back up on the screen. And she mentioned that Michael Thompson in Public Works had been helpful to her to explain what had gone on. Well, of course, he was working under the direction of Chuck All. And Chuck All had been the Public Works Director, and then the City Manager, and then the Public Works Director, and then under FBI investigation. And now I think he's a consultant, and he's wandering around either between Minnesota and Florida. Who knows? But Michael Thompson was very helpful to her to explain what was going on. So let's pull that screen up. Okay, it's easy enough to understand how they got $80 million of outstanding debt. That's primarily all for road reconstruction projects because of the way that they were doing their debt and how they were bonding. Let's pull this up again. Then they had $8 million overall deficit in their improvement project funds. That means that they were minus $8 million minus in these projects. I don't know who was waiting for their money, but that means they were minus $8 million in the hole. That's not just the debt that they owed. That was in addition to the $80 million debt. Let's take a look again. Then they had a $2.4 million deficit in their municipal state aid account. You see, as a municipality, they get state aid from the state, and apparently they had a deficit of minus $2.4 million in that account. So that didn't mean that they had $2.4 million coming to them from the state. It meant that somewhere along the way, they still owed the state $2.4 million. That's in addition to the deficit, and that's in addition to the $80 million in debt to the bondholders. Let's take a look. Then they had $8 million in pending state payments. So the state of Minnesota owed Maplewood $8 million, but they were not going to pay that to Maplewood. The state of Minnesota said, we're not going to pay you the $8 million you're entitled to. Because as we look at the next line here, and we bring this up, that's because they owed $8 million to the state for the state aid debt. So the state of Minnesota says, why should we pay you anything? We're not going to give you money since you owe us a bunch of money. Why would we do that? They weren't going to participate in the Ponzi scheme, in other words. Let's take a look at the next.
Yes, and of course, none of this was reported in the Pioneer Press.
No.
For all these years, none of this reported in the little
And
Lily Review.
and they
This was
never
nothing in
and
the-
they never reported it in the open to the council like this.
But
Because
they-
if they had, we would have reported it here. And we've never reported this here other than over the past couple of weeks, because this is the first that they've really been in the public about what's gone on. And that's because they've been busy trying to pay off these things and trying to make good their tokens over the past few years. And now that they feel that they are somewhat close to being where they should be, now they're disclosing it, so now they can say, whew, boy, we dodged that bullet.
And of course, when they've been trying to capture this money, not only they've had big property tax increases, they had big franchise fee increases, but they probably part of the reason crime has increased so dramatically in Maplewood is because they let police officers go unfilled. They had
yes.
big problems with the fire department because they didn't fill positions there, and they eliminated positions. They've done all these things, and of course, in general, the city is worse off. Maplewood Mall is crumbling. There are all kinds of issues all over the city. So when they've been trying to pay the state back and try to resolve all this, there's been big downsides, although they will tell you everything is great.
Yeah. Well, let's pull this one up. Last thing, that the local government aid for debt service and crumbling streets. Now, getting back to Michael Thompson telling the finance director, how all this happened. Well, we've reported on this years and years ago because Michael Thompson and Chuck All also told me how it all happened and how it all worked. And just as a recap of that, is that I discovered the last year that I was mayor, because this was something that was the big internal secret that the public works people and the finance director, that they were keeping very quiet, is that what they were doing, and they would have these income streams from the environmental utility tax or the sanitary utility fees. And those would be income streams coming in every single month and quarter from every single property owner and a unit in Maplewood. And they wouldn't just take this money and say, let's keep that money in a kitty, then we'll use that when we do our road reconstruction project as part of our cash contribution. No, what they did instead is that they would bond against, because they would spend all the money, but they would want to have more money. So they would bond against the future income streams going into those enterprise funds. So any future monies collected, all the increases, all of that, were already bonded against and spoken for as collateral to pay back the money that the city of Maplewood borrowed. So they never really had any real money in any of these accounts because they borrowed against the future income stream, which had to be used then to pay for all the borrowing. The other thing that they did is that they would do, say, for in these special road improvement projects, they would do what are called feasibility studies. And they would have their public works engineers do these feasibility studies. And they would, of course, be paid out of the normal city operational budget because they're a city employee. But what they were told to do is to keep track of their hours that they did any work on the feasibility project study or the project. Keep track of their hours. And then when it came time to going out to get the borrowed money for the road reconstruction project, what they had to do is that they would take their number of hours that they kept track of and then bill it against that project. And not only bill it against that project at what their rate normally would be, but their rate times 3. And so while they had gotten paid out of the operational budget, they were actually charging against that account for that street improvement project their hourly rate as it calculates out times 3. And then that would be added to what the costs of the project are. The city of Maplewood would bond for the cost of the projects, including that staff's salary or hourly wage prorated times 3. And you can see how you can get up to $80 million pretty quick when you are multiplying and adding in staff time that was already paid for. But now this is another way to pull money out of another kitty somewhere, times 3.
And of course,
Times 3.
unbelievable, times 3.
Always.
If you look at the cost at these back neighborhood streets, these little streets in back neighborhoods, the cost that they to do these streets, you would think they would be able to do them on a good deal. They're just astronomical. The price they had to
and that's part of the reason why the costs of those projects, in the end, were higher than they should have been, because the city of Maplewood was borrowing more money than what that project really actually costs, because they were building in other costs that were already paid for. And that this was just another way to pull money from another source, and we'll worry about paying for it another day.
Now,
Like I said, it's a very that parallels the classic Ponzi scheme.
And now, of course, this presenter, the finance director, said that the council, she implied that, or said that the council was being individually told about this. Now, I don't know what that means, because she didn't go into any detail. It was just heebie-jeebie, hee-haw, the language she used, if you listen to her language. But it implies that she went individually, or the finance directors over the years individually met with the council members, and they told them about this scheme, this story, this Ponzi scheme, which was going on, and that the council members were actually hiding it from the public, or not disclosing, concealing it from the public, that they were full aware. Now, when you were mayor, did the finance director come to tell you what the Ponzi scheme was on an individual basis?
Absolutely not. It was my discovery based upon they had a slip of the tongue at a council meeting, because I would always ask them, well, what is the fund balance on the environmental utility tax or whatever? And they'd always be like, because they'd want to say, oh, we want to use it to spend it on such and such. Well, what's the balance? I mean, why are we talking about spending it if we don't know what our balance is? They would never know the balance. And keep in mind, in Maplewood, it's Plan B city, council and mayor are part-time, and it's run by the city manager. And of course, Chuck All never had an understanding of what his balance was on anything. And it was just one day there was a slip of the tongue where he called Public Works an enterprise fund. And you see, being a lawyer, I know that an enterprise fund in municipal law is a special type of account that is established under state law. And you have to meet certain criteria if you're calling something an enterprise fund. And there's certain rules and regulations about how you utilize that money, how it has to be separate and segregated from your operational budget. It has to be bringing in revenue from a source different than the operational budget monies.
Right.
There's a lot of things. And because he used that terminology, and it was very weird to me, I started doing an investigation. And that is how I discovered it. And I eventually got an email from Mr. Chuck All acknowledging this whole thing about how the staff salaries are booked against a project times 3, and then that's where we go from there. And I've got the whole spreadsheet of at least 10 different projects of how much of it is bonded for staff salaries over time, what the interest is over 15 years. I got the whole thing. So we're going to jump ahead to the last clip because I'm going to set this up. Is that once I discovered what the city of Maplewood was doing, I believed that it was inappropriate way of doing your financing. And so I disclosed it to my council. That was the last year I was mayor. I disclosed it to my council at a public meeting when we were talking about our new budget for the next year. Because I was in the council minority, the council majority, who supported Chuck All, could care less and turned a deaf ear to the whole thing. They didn't care. So the next time around, the next new administration that came in, new mayor, new council.
And we're talking about Will Rossbach.
Yeah. And then the next new council that came on board shortly in a few years after that, I went forward at a public presentation, gave a presentation with all the data to disclose and let them know that this was going on, that I thought it was wrong and they should look into it. They blew it off. They could care less.
That was North Solbeck.
And Marley Abrams, council member, who is now the appointed mayor of Maplewood, but because they too supported Chuck All, they didn't want to hear a thing about it. So they put it under the carpet and everything continued as it was. Now, Marley Abrams is the appointed mayor. Let's see how she reacts to the new finance directors talking about how she has finally been able to bring Maplewood out of the dark ages.
It's absolutely visionary that we are doing this and totally flipping the way that we view ourselves financially.
Yes.
I really appreciate this, your presentation and your efforts on this.
It's a
But
sea
There aren't
change.
any questions up here.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Knutson.
Well, it looks incredible. Where does all the cash come from?
Well, the utility funds are in they have good cash position. We plan it that way. We fund it through our rate system, which incorporates depreciation, and that's what pays for the infrastructure. The franchise fees come from the gas and electric. And the intergovernmental revenue is primarily going to be local government aid, but there's also some MSA construction aid in there. And the special assessments ultimately comes from the benefited property owners, but we would normally bond for it and have to get the cash through bonding, but in this way, we're going to upfront the cash and not borrow. So that'll reduce.
Are they a reliable source, the assessments?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's death or taxes. I mean, you pay, if you don't pay, your property gets forfeited.
So there we go. The appointed Marley Abrams finding and saying that, oh my gosh, this is such a creative, innovative way now that to really approach all of our finances, and that, wow, we're not going to be bonding against the income streams of our environmental utility tax. We're not going to bond against special assessments as a future stream of revenue anymore. We're actually going to just do a pay-as-you-go. Wow, do you know what a substantial financial diet Maplewood has been on for the last 4 years in order to cut off all of these sources of revenue as bonding sources? It's incredible. Well, Mr. Berglund, we've come to the end of our program. We're going to talk a little bit more about this because there is more to the details. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this week's newscast. Bye-bye.